Thank you, Steve. Very good to be here. Hello, everyone. The first session which I was listening to made me thinking that picture is very much either black or white in Ukraine. And I disagree with such thinking, and I think that I will try to offer you a framework which will put the situation in Ukraine into a bit of a different perspective. Because if we take the black assumption, we will say that President Yanukovych and his people are devil people who want to either destroy Ukraine or take away independence. If you take the good side, you will see that the reforms are on the way, that we just have to wait, and the good outcome will be there. And obviously, there was a discussion about economy versus values during the first panel, and I must say that the economy is not doing better than politics in Ukraine. And I will very briefly talk about the numbers. Of course, the economic situation is much better now in Ukraine. Ukraine was among the worst hit economies by the economic crisis a few years ago, and what is happening now that the IMF is back, that some conditions are being met, and that the money are coming, it's all there. And of course, this is probably the biggest success of the current leadership. I will not give you much numbers because you can read in the reports of the World Bank, of Ukrainian economists. Basically, the economy is going up, and we can see that industry picks up, that retail picks up slowly. Inflation is still there. There are problems with budget deficit, but still we see that the recovery is there. The main question is, of course, how sustainable is this growth? And I would say that it both goes about the economy, but about business in Ukraine. That sometimes economy grows despite what government is doing, and business is surviving and developing despite what government is doing. So I see two pictures. There is one picture of the West, the picture of Ukraine that you want to see. Ukraine being closer to Europe, willing to integrate, willing to reform, and there is another picture of Ukraine. And here comes my framework. That if you don't take this black and white picture and you ask yourself why these people are doing what they're doing, what is their motivation? And the motivation is very simple. There is a need to create a system in Ukraine that will help a very small group of people to benefit from what's happening in the country, to benefit from the economy. And the system should not have any competition from the inside, which means no political opposition, no protests in the society. The system which is comfortable for the leadership and a small group of people. And there is also should be very little intervention from the West, both from the outside, both from Russia, but also from the West. And we joke in Ukraine that which means taxes should be robbed by only people from taxes. And this is what basically the underlying idea of what is happening now. Ukrainian economy is still very highly dependent on exports of very low value-added products. And we saw that when the crisis hit Ukraine, this strategy was not really sustainable, and many from international community from inside Ukraine were saying that basically reforms are needed to make the growth sustainable. So we have stability now, economic stability, political stability. But as we also say that be careful of what you're wishing because you may get it. And yes, there were a big number of reforms started in Ukraine, and I will probably not go much into detail on IMF imposed or conditional reforms such as pension, tariffs for communal services, tax reform of natural gas. But again, if we ask why this reform were implemented in Ukraine, it's basically to get loans and to keep the economy afloat. We had a big discussion on the political reforms, and again, I will just mention constitutional change, electoral law, judicial, administrative, access to public information. All these processes were started, but when you ask yourself why they were started, is basically to support the system that is the leadership wants to build, and not to move Ukraine to the market economy. And now moving on to economic reforms. We discussed a lot about corruption, and I'm not going to dwell on that. Obviously, the legislation was cancelled and new was adopted, but the question in Ukraine is obviously not about the legislation in place or even institutions in place, but about its implementation or the possibility to challenge the non-implementation in the courts. And here comes a big problem with judiciary. Investment climate, obviously, I will not dwell much on that. We have other panelists to talk about. Privatization, which was also mentioned, when we have still a number of factories that are in state hands, and when we see that privatization is again happening to increase the capitals of those who are in power, close to power. Land reform, yes, the law of cadastre was adopted by the parliament today, but again, we know that the land reform is not going to happen before a small number of people in Ukraine will be able to control all the land, and it will not be beneficial for the economy or for the people. So basically my conclusion on the political reforms, and we'll come to the economic part as well, is that yes, we have a very strong vertical, which is very good for Ukraine. We have one person for the first time in Ukrainian history being responsible for what is happening. But at the same time, what this person is doing with the authority and with his responsibilities, and is it possible to keep him accountable for that? Conclusion on economic reforms. I would say that yes, as I said, we have those, but it still looks like fixing problems in order to either get money from the IMF or keep the voters more or less happy. And surprisingly, we see that the disillusionment and disappointment of the public in Ukraine comes now from the east, from the part where Yanukovych and his colleagues come from. Obviously there is very little competition in the economy. We have about 10 people controlling all the economy. I'll just give you numbers which Ukrainian journalists due to freedom of speech in Ukraine provided. Is basically we have heavy industry controlled by just 5 people close to the authorities. We have aviation sector controlled by 3 people. We have a sector of chemicals controlled by 1 person. Again, we have to say that maybe it's not bad that people are trying to build stronger companies and they want to be global players, but at the same time we see that they're not building their companies or their empires, business empires, on innovation or on bringing investment and modernizing, but they're basically relying on either cheaper gas from Russia, which is going to be not very cheap very soon, or basically the lack of competition. And I will just give you I'll give you a few numbers. Unfortunately, Ukraine didn't move to better numbers in terms of international economic ratings, and IFC is still saying that Ukraine is on 145th place out of 183 in terms of how you can do business in Ukraine. It's not improving. Obviously, as today was mentioned, Ukraine was named the 5th worst economy of the world, and it doesn't help us obviously to attract investors or to encourage new business and innovation in Ukraine. And the Wall Street Journal's rating, which puts Ukraine on 164th in terms of economic freedoms. Again, I have to say that it's not about the current administration, president, government, who made these bad conditions or bad ratings happen. It's something that stems from the Soviet legacy that was not really transformed. It stems from the non-doing of reforms by the previous administrations, but we are here where we are. And to conclude, I will just talk a little bit about the willingness, capacity, and constraints of the current leadership and the people around the leadership. That basically, if the willingness for reform is there, if this helps create or maintain the system that the people are trying to build. And we also hear people in the administration saying we are now following our national interests. But again, if you ask what kind of national interests these are basically corporate interests and not about that much. Capacity, it's very good to have vertical if vertical works, but again, I feel very big pity for the president and his team that he may have certain will for certain changes, but the administration and the capacity of administration to introduce changes, even if the goodwill is there, the capacity is very low, and there is very little done to enhance this capacity. Deputy Minister Klimkin was mentioned about the cuts in the administration by 20%. But again, the cuts are not enough to strengthen the capacity have to do training, you have to connect people with Western institutions, and this is something that is not happening. And on constraints, there are too many constraints for the current implementation, which is very good. On the one hand, we have IMF, we have the EU, US, but on the other hand, we have the voters. But if you look at the voters' moves, first time probably in Ukrainian history after the Orange Revolution, it's clear that people will not really care much about democracy and freedoms anymore. What they will care about is bread and butter. And this is a very bad news for Ukraine.